Hi everybody, this is Mr. Zoeller, and today I'm going to be presenting to you about the legislative branch of the United States government found in Article 1 of the Constitution. So our legislative branch is made up of two different chambers or two houses of government. So we have what's called a bicameral legislature. So just remember, students, bicameral referring to two houses, and the way to kind of remember that is a bicycle has two wheels, just like bicameral is two houses. And then the other phrase you should know is that a unicameral legislature is that one that has one house. And so if you think of a unicycle, it has one wheel. So kind of way to remember it. But the United States legislature, we have a bicameral legislature of two houses or two different groups of people. So the two groups are called the Senate and the House of Representatives. And if you remember from my previous video, why are there two houses? Remember that during the creation of the Constitution, there was a large argument between the large states and population that wanted representation to be based on population, known as the Virginia Plan. And remember, the smaller states wanted to have equal vote, equal representation in the government from the New Jersey Plan. So the Connecticut Compromise, or the Great Compromise, remember, combined those plans together, which led to a legislature that consists of two houses, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So Congress is, once again, the House of Representatives and the Senate. So whenever you hear the word Congress, we're referring to both of these. So altogether in Congress, we have 535 members. So remember, the House of Representatives is based on a state's population. So the states that have more people are going to have more members in the House of Representatives. And then remember, in the Senate, that every single state gets 2 senators. So since we have 50 states, 50 times 2 is 100. So there are 100 senators. So this map is showing you how many members of Congress there are in each of the states. And as you will see in my executive branch video about the Electoral College, you'll notice that the electoral votes that a state has is based off of how many members in Congress that state has. So once again, the higher the population of the state, the more members in the House of Representatives that there are. So the important part for the figuring out how many members every state gets is done through a census, where the government is asking families to provide how many people live in their homes. And this usually takes place every 10 years at the beginning of the decade. So the previous one we had was in 2010, and the most recent one we have going on is 2020 right now. So every 10 years, the United States is going to conduct a census to figure out how many people live in each state and which areas to determine representation in Congress, because we want to make sure that it's proportional, that each region has a similar amount of people. And so you can see on this map here from the 2010 census, the states that are in blue grew in population over the 10-year period, so they gained some of the seats in the House of Representatives. The ones in gray stay the same, and then the ones that are kind of the yellowish gold color decreased in population over the 10 years, or the others grew at a steadier rate, and that's why they lost some seats in the House of Representatives. So it's important that our government does maintain this and check on it every 10 years. So what are the requirements to be in a U.S. Senator or to be in the House of Representatives? And this is a picture from the chamber of the House of Representatives at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And you can see the president here during what's called the State of the Union address. That's one of the powers of the president, is to address Congress and update them on how our country is doing. So what are the requirements to serve in the House of Representatives? So first off, you need to know is that every state has at least one representative. And remember, it is determined by population. So some states only have one member in the House of Representatives, while other states have, like California, 53. So if you are in the House of Representatives, you are elected every 2 years. So there are elections every 2 years for this. You have to be a minimum age of at least 25 years old. You have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years. And then you must live in the state you represent. Or in other words, like in a larger state like Texas or California or New York, you also have to live, of course, in the district, the area that you are representing. So those are the requirements to serve in the House of Representatives. For the U.S. Senate, It's very similar. So there's only 2 senators from each state. So remember, it's equal. A third of the senators are elected every other year. So every 2 years, a third of the U.S. Senate is elected. And that's because they serve 6-year terms. So kind of think about, like, why do you think they do this? So why would they have like a third of the senators elected every 2 years or every other year? For the U.S. Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old. You must have been a U.S. citizen for at least 9 years. And then, of course, you must live in the state that you represent. Let's talk a little bit about some of the officers of the Congress. So first off, the members of the Senate and the House of Representatives elect their own officers. The Vice President of the United States is called the President of the Senate. So he kind of oversees the Senate. And one of the special powers that the Vice President has is that if there is a tie vote in the Senate, which since there's always an even number of senators because there's 2 per state, that means the Vice President would get to cast a tie vote. And then the leader of the House of Representatives is known as the Speaker of the House. And so we'll talk more about that in class. So what are some powers of the House of Representatives and the Senate, or once again known as the Congress? So in Article 1, Section 8, here are some of the powers that are given to Congress. So they have a lot of different powers in the Constitution. Article 1 is the longest part of the Constitution. So they have the power to collect taxes. That's money that people pay to the government. They get to determine how to spend those taxes to promote the general welfare. Remember that from the preamble. They have the power to borrow money, to regulate commerce, or think of trade that way among the states and between countries. They get to regulate the rules for immigration into the United States. They get to determine money, coining money. They get to regulate our mail or postal offices. They regulate patents and copyright, so when people come up with ideas and inventions. They have the power to declare war. So it is the elected representatives of the United States that get to do that. And then the president's job is then to run that war, but the Congress is the one that declares it. And also going with the military, the Congress has the power to raise and support military forces. So they are the ones that provide the money to provide for the military. The Congress also establishes the federal courts, except for the U.S. Supreme Court. So they get to establish the lower federal courts. And then remember, as you'll find out in the executive branch, the president gets to nominate judges into those courts. And then we'll take a look on the next slide here in what the necessary and proper clause is. So what is the necessary and proper clause for the U.S. Congress? So it says in the Constitution to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So this is also called the elastic clause. And if you think of like a rubber band, it's elastic because you can really stretch it out. So we say that this line in the Constitution stretches the powers of what the Congress has. So it gives Congress the power to make laws about topics that were not an issue when the Constitution was written. So when we're thinking about like the internet or like the Air Force, those things did not exist in 1787 when the Constitution was created. So our founding fathers wanted to make sure that overall for those powers, they wanted the Congress to kind of think outside the box a little bit, stretch their powers a bit to make sure that it helps the citizens of the United States. Some powers that are denied to Congress. So Section 9 says that the U.S. Congress cannot do the following things at all. So we have suspend the writ of habeas corpus. So that is when the government would arrest you as a prisoner, and then they would not explain to you what you're being arrested for. So the Congress cannot do that. They cannot pass what are called ex post facto laws. So that means that if you had done something and then later on there's a law that's created saying that that action is illegal or against the law, you would not be punished for that because you did whatever that crime was before the law was created. So you can't be punished for something that you had done when there was no law about it. The Congress cannot favor one state over the other, so they are to treat all the states equally. And then the last part, and this was more important during the colonial time period, remember we didn't want to have kings or queens. We were getting away from that system in Great Britain, so the Congress cannot grant titles of nobility. All right, and our final thing I want to go over is what powers are denied to the state legislatures, the state governments, because all the states also have their own legislative branch, their own Congress, basically. So the state governments cannot pass any laws that are inconsistent with federal laws. So that means if the U.S. Congress passes a law and the state of Wyoming passes a law, and they cannot contradict. So that means the U.S. law is supreme. So we'll talk about that in another video called the Supremacy Clause. States are also not allowed to coin their own money. That's something that happened under the Articles of Confederation. So remember, only Congress gets to do that. They don't get to make treaties or alliances with other countries. That's the job of the president with approval of the Senate. They cannot tax other states. So remember that all the states are to be treated equally, and Congress gets to deal with that. And they don't get to keep troops or engage in war. That is a power, once again, delegated to the U.S. Congress. So hopefully that helps you guys out on an overview of the legislative branch. And this is Mr. Zoeller signing out. Have a good day. Bye-bye.